All right, so I'm Mitch Solomon. I run the user acquisition and engagement for EA Sports mobile titles.
I am Eyal Grundstein. I'm VP User Acquisition and Growth Marketing for GSN, Game Show Network Games.
Christian Calderon, CRO at Ketchapp.
My name's Charles Manning. I'm the CEO of Kochava, and we do mobile attribution, so we do tracking for mobile apps.
Cool. So I wanted to focus on, I think we'll focus on a few different aspects. We'll talk about data. We'll talk about how you scale campaigns, how you use data to scale campaigns. But just to start, if someone can throw out, what are the sort of initial data elements that you look at when you're running a campaign? What are the important ones that you tend to look at in the beginning?
We look at CTR, CVR, CPI, LTV, etc. I hope I'm not speaking Chinese here. But at the core, early term metrics that tell us the yield of our impressions across kind of the inventory that we're placed on.
So we'll having a feel for different intervals of metrics too is incredibly important. Understanding what your D1 RPI versus D3 versus D7 is and how that breeds downstream performance, even on D1, D2, looking at app opens and level progress are huge.
Yeah, I'll just add to that. So like at a high level, what we're trying to do is be profitable, right, with our UA spend. And then we're also trying to figure out how quickly can we be profitable and how quickly can we forecast that profitability. So when he's saying things like D1, D2, D3, day 1, day 2, day 3, we're tracking these things as early as we can so that we can forecast that, whether we're forecasting 90 days out, 100 days out, 300 days out, that profitability. So that being said, everything that was mentioned here are very, very important metrics. And then also any events, that you could potentially track in like a Kochava and have that being passed to your ad partners like AppLovin as quickly as possible so that you can continue to target those highly valuable users and detect them that they're highly valuable as soon as possible. So those are the kinds of things that we care about: speed and value.
And just to kind of top it off, so all fantastic points. I wanted to make sure you translated D1 and D3 and D7, all good early indicators. The other, so real time, would totally agree with that. The other interesting data point that I've seen our advertisers really focus on in a hyper way is if you're in the business of engagement because you're selling impressions, obviously that is the function of your LTV, your lifetime value. If you're in the business of selling in-app purchases, that's your function. And it seems really almost kind of preschool to unpack that. But I think it's really important to qualify, are you in the business of creating engagement, or are you in the business of selling IAP, and target your metrics around whatever those KPIs are.
Charles, are you seeing any customers that are not, let's say, analytical in their marketing activity, or just out there to spend just for brand value, something along those lines? Or do you see data sort of in every single campaign that gets run through your ecosystem?
Yeah. So the brand guys are becoming more performance-oriented. The performance guys are becoming more brand-oriented. It's why you see Machine Zone doing TV ads, and GSN doing TV ads, Adult Swim with Turner doing TV ads. And while we do TV attribution around that, it's really a brand play in this TV lift discussion. At the end of 2013, I think 89% of our customers were gaming. At the end of 2015, 42% were gaming. And that wasn't from attrition. Right. It was because brand guys were becoming more aware of the importance of measurement, even if lift was the measure, right?
Sure.
And so what I think this group is uniquely positioned in is that you have this like amazing feedback loop that brand people don't get the benefit of having. And that is when you add dollars in, you can immediately measure how value comes out. And so because you're in that unique position, you don't want to squander it. Like that's how you're going to be really unique and capable. And so you use, important partners who can help you buy that media.
Sure. So I think that was a great distinction that was mentioned before between what is your KPI? Is it ad-based? Is it monetization-based? And so is it retention, or is it, return on ad spend? So that certainly you're looking at a lot of first-party data over there. You're creating a feedback loop. Is anybody using any third-party data sets that are actually successful and working well in terms of helping to scale a campaign?
Yeah, so we've actually done a few tests with very mixed results. But when you can actually get some real affinity in terms of the content and how that relates to the users you're actually buying in terms of lists, and then going out, being able to tie revenue to those users, you can really make some third-party data valuable, and creating segments that you can then build lookalikes off of and really expand your reach.
Are there any data sets that you would recommend for people to look at that are actually compelling?
We've had some app usage data that was pretty interesting in terms of certain apps owned, or laying over financial apps with other apps owned to try to get an indicator of financial wealth or health.
Anybody else? Eyal, have you seen success with that?
Well, I mean, back in the days, there was a product called Onavo that was really helpful in understanding usage, because they were actually building off of real usage data. Usage has become a real hot topic. There's no currently I would say a really good, effective data source, but I think usage is very useful. Like a rudimentary approach to using app usage data is looking at what reviews your users did for other apps, and then trying to understand what other apps are using. So that's an example. And that's a really rudimentary example, but you can look at kind of where your users reside and then go target those users in those apps. But at the core, yeah, I think usage is really a very interesting metric, and I'd love to see products that can give us insight into usage across the app ecosystem.
And just to qualify, usage is important because of affinity, right?
Yeah, an actual active usage versus installed once, one and done.
Right.
Yeah.
I think you could also look at peak usage just from a supply and demand perspective, right? Like if you have low usage points and you're bidding, your price is going to be higher because the supply is less. If you have higher peak usage and you bid, the price is going to be less. Low usage price is going to be higher. High usage price is going to be less because there's more supply versus demand. So it's also interesting to look at it from just a volume perspective.
I mean, Charles, do you incorporate any third-party data sets for your partners?
We have this new product that we came out at the end of Q4 called the Collective, and the Collective gets populated by ad networks and publishers and data providers. And the reason why these partners send all that data in is we can't use our customer data to help another customer's data. Our customer's data is theirs. It's kind of the mantra of your data is your own. But what's interesting is that ad networks and media providers have a distinct value proposition in selling media to those audiences. And so the Collective is populated by these ad partners, and then customers can say, show me users who play strategy games who are highly engaged and clicked on an ad within the last 4 days. And it says, oh, there's 60,000 unique device IDs, and here are the 4 ad networks from which you can buy them specifically. And then you still buy the media from them. And so that's a play on the data model. We recently acquired, and we haven't yet announced, a really interesting data component that we acquired that is game center data.
Okay.
So significant, i.e. 430 million game center IDs, all the leaderboards that have been populated by those IDs linked to device IDs. So wouldn't it be interesting?
Sounds compelling.
Yeah, I mean, for this audience, show me all the people who got to a certain level in this leaderboard within this game. I want to go market them.
Sure.
And I think, it's where we're working with AppLovin on some of these things to drive media sales to those audiences, and something where I think this audience specifically would find value in.
I have a quick question. I'm just curious, how do you get around COPA and stuff if you're selling, customers' data? They're tied to IDFAs. Isn't that against Apple and Google guidelines?
Yeah. So all of our data that comes in from the measurement side is under the terms of service of our publisher, and it's owned by our customer. We don't have access to it. All of the data that comes in through the Collective is being granted to us as a license from whoever provides it, and they're not supposed to give it to us unless it's compliant with all those rules. So it's arguably a COPA-safe, privacy-safe pool of devices, which means it's going to be intrinsically more limited, but comfortable, if that's a good distinction.
Makes sense. So we've spoken about, I think, first-party data sets, third-party data sets. One of the things I know that is interesting and useful when setting up campaigns is ad creatives and testing ad creatives, and I think we've discussed this, offline about App Store optimization as well, making sure all that works. Christian, do you have any commentary on that in terms of like how to make that actually work for somebody?
Yeah, for sure. So I was on stage at Google I/O to launch their A/B testing product for the storefront pages, and I think it's really awesome to have kind of a holistic marketing approach because the App Store is a part of your funnel, right? And so kind of the approach that we take is how do you stay holistic? How do you make sure that the colors that you're using are tied to the colors in your ad creative, that the message that you're delivering across, that the user really understands, and so they can really understand the core value proposition of your game, that you're not confusing the user. And it's awesome because a lot of this stuff you can test for free, right? Like it's as long as you have an app on Android, you can test all these things for free on Google Play. So we think it's incredibly important. And it's also incredibly important to have a unified marketing message that you're sending to your users so they understand exactly what they're getting themselves into, and so that you don't trick them. And at the end of the day, this for us has resulted in higher conversion and also higher lifetime value for our users when they come in organically and from a paid basis.
Eyal, have you seen the same type of strategy work?
Yeah, so we are really trying to optimize our App Store page to be in line with the creatives we use in the UA landscape just to drive conversions, right? So we're constantly testing our screenshots as well as kind of rotating through creatives and trying to make a unified kind of brand message. We also have the privilege of using licensed IP that really helps our conversion rates, such as Wheel of Fortune and so forth. And we're also trying that in the App Store pages as well as in our UA ads. And we really see a difference between kind of generic ads we run versus branded ads that we run.
Are there any cases where any specific, like a specific example or something where you've actually seen something work really well that wasn't working prior? Anybody over here? So a specific tweak that you've made that's worked well?
One thing that was interesting for us is video. We had a video page when video was just introduced in the App Store, and then screenshots, and we found that the thumbnail was super important to drive conversions to the actual installs in the page. And conceptually we thought, oh, it's a video, everyone's going to click on it, but the thumbnail made such a big difference that if we had a bad thumbnail, video just dropped our conversions immensely. So everything in the App Store counts, and you really want to optimize your listing as much as you can.
Yeah, I have a couple too. So icons for us, largest increase in conversion, like your icon. It's obvious, it's hard to test once the app is already out there. But for a game like 2 Dots prior to Ketchapp, I was a VP of marketing and revenue at Dots. And every time we change the icon, we'd see a 20-25% lift in DAU, daily active users. That's also tied to the app update. But the icon is huge conversion. Then after that, screenshots, really huge in changing your conversion, both positively and negatively. And then also the short description in your Google Play description, you have a long description and short description. What we found is actually not to type in a short description, but in that field to type in a call to action. So come play this game now. As a short call to action. So something like that actually converted a lot better than actually describing in a short sentence what the game was about.
Mitch, you run a bunch of interesting titles over at EA, some great titles, NBA, FIFA, Madden. So is there anything that you would say is sort of, I guess, different or unique in your scenario in terms of when you're running campaigns and how to run successful campaigns for your titles versus other genres?
So one of the first things I'll call is going back to creative, where we have real life images of people as well as gameplay images and even certain games that we're featuring. And understanding that someone seeing an ad that is for a specific Thanksgiving game, I point back to 2 years ago with the Niners Seahawks, people don't understand that that's necessarily for a mobile app. And so even though you might have amazing CTRs, you actually aren't backing out at the end of the day. So being able to pay attention to those sort of more downstream events, or even being able to hopefully tie ROAS to some extent to those creative, can really give you a feel for what's working, and even if something appears on the surface to be working, why it might not be.
That's cool. Charles, do you see anything across all the genres? Differences?
Yeah. So one of the neat things about being a tracking business is you see a lot of genres, and so it's like
pretty much everything.
Yeah, I mean you see this ton,
Right.
this fantastic spectrum. McDonald's, certainly not speaking for them. I'm not an advocate to them. I don't represent them, but I'm just saying, as a guy who works for a company that is a vendor to them, this is what I observe. Be careful about that. But they are driving redemptions, offer redemptions. And what are offer redemptions? So they've got this app, and the app gets promoted in store at McDonald's. It gets promoted on TV. It gets promoted all these places. But you think about the franchise model. You've got a company that is corporate, and it is trying to encourage people to buy franchises in various different locations, and then furthermore highlight the value the corporate is delivering to that franchise owner. How does corporate deliver value to a franchise owner? It drives people. They do that through traditional advertising and other. So here's a scenario where you've got a mobile app that is used to be a payment mechanism, potentially, an offer redemptions, which means also a loyalty mechanism, a loyalty accrual mechanism, and is variable based on region. So like, for example, in Asia Pac, in Singapore specifically, McDonald's does delivery much like Pizza Hut does. They don't do that here, but they do that there. And so the app can facilitate delivery. So really interesting way to think about that use case, because our customer is corporate, building value for franchise owners, which is driving bodies into stores. All the way on the other side of the extreme, you've got customers who are like Eyal or like Machine Zone or like SGN, who are on the gaming side, who are driving bodies into a return on ad spend. And are they flipping the bingo slots, or are they not? And that's an interesting spectrum to look at. The other kind of interesting one that I'd articulate is how much media on demand companies we have using the product. So NBC, CBS, Disney, ABC, Netflix, they're all using Kochava, and many of them, I don't want to say who and what and where, but many of them are thinking about content consumption. So everyone knows about binge watching content, right? Wouldn't it be interesting if you know who's driving a lot of binge watching, and therefore, back to that first question.
Almost like retention, right?
It's totally a retention game.
Yeah.
But wouldn't it be interesting if you're in the business of producing content to know how many people are watching more than 30 minutes every 2 weeks of The Voice, and back that all the way back into a creative ad unit, by ad network, by time segment, by cohort of install.
Sure.
Really cool, different way to look at it.
It's pretty complex. So Eyal, we made the distinction before between retention and return ad spend, depending on sort of what your goals are. Do you guys focus on both, or is it purely return ad spend, or are you actually looking at both metrics within your games?
Yeah. So early term ARPU captures retention to some degree, but there are ways, obviously, to game that. So we look at retention, payer percent, early term ARPU, and other metrics as a holistic view to see source quality and sub-source quality.
Do you index it based on those metrics, or do you look at each one of those metrics? Do you create a GSN strength code, if you will? Yeah,
we sort by all of these as well as kind of figure out overall return on ad spend. At the core, we'd love to see high volume with the highest ROI, but it's very hard to find a very high volume channel that has higher ROI. So at the core, we're focused on overall profitability, but looking at metrics such as retention and other early indicators helps you kind of weed out the bad sources early on before committing to a large budget.
So you're looking at everything. It's not exactly a clear line between the two. You're looking at both, or really at all the metrics, and you combine, essentially. Exactly.
Okay. And to give you an example, you can have a channel that has really high ARPU, but has really low retention. So what could be happening is a depositor that may not be 100% legitimate is actually doing a very front-loaded transaction to make the early term numbers look good, but then abandons and leaves. And that's a real red flag that you don't necessarily capture by just looking at early term ARPU, right? So you really have to look at a holistic.
And to be clear, you're saying fraud when you say that.
Yeah, that's one version of fraud.
That's another word for that. So actually, let's great segue. Let's talk about fraud a little bit. So we've spoken a lot, about the different KPIs that everybody looks at. Fraud is obviously a huge problem on desktop. It's certainly a problem in mobile as well. How do you guys deal with that? Mitch, maybe you can talk. Is there anything specifically that you're looking at within the fraud space, how to deal with that, or is it just sort of a general, you try to avoid it?
Well, you definitely try to avoid it. But overall, there's a few things. One of the biggest things is if you have people eating their own dog food and like playing the games and in the space, you'll have a few, you'll see ads from every network, and you'll probably be served quite a few from yourself. So making sure you're actually in the space and seeing what's out in the wild is really big, beyond even some of the software out there that's helping with fraud prevention. I will say we do have quite a few networks that we're using. Can't specifically say which, but that we are using to help look at high initial app open rates that just peak off really quickly. Again, front-loaded purchasing, and quite a few other indicators, even single purchases and like minor DAU upticks that are just single app opens and nothing.
Christian, do you see anything specifically over there in terms of your analysis?
Yeah, so I think similar to Eyal, like we're looking kind of at everything to try to understand like the full picture. And I think that's the best approach, is to be smart and intelligent about how you spend money. We don't use any like service to help us detect fraud, mainly because it's a cost and I don't know how that's going to affect my yield curve. It could maybe save me some money on ROI. It could maybe decrease my ROI because I'm spending money to detect the fraud. But in general, I think, fortunate enough that, I can be intelligent enough about how I spend to detect these things. And for me, it's just the best way to go.
Cool.
Yeah, and to add to that, Charles, Kochava has a really strong fraud tool that we use, and there's others in the market, such as Forensic and so forth. I think if you're spending $1 million monthly budgets, I think it's valuable to do kind of that digging of fraud and see, at least occasionally see that you're not being frauded, because it really helps to understand where your traffic is run, and that goes directly into the bottom line. Right?
$1 million a month is a hell of a threshold. I would say if you're spending like $200,000 or $100,000 a month, that's still a pretty significant. Well,
I think even if you're spending 20, you don't want real users.
The question
right?
is how much of what's a percentage point? It's pretty significant. So
yeah.
To Eyal's point, we do have a fraud product. We provide it as a no-cost add-on to any customer who's using our product to a certain extent, and I can give you details later if you want. But the whole point was we don't want to offset that yield optimization threshold. We want it to be a value add. So I think Christian's point is totally valid with many customers. The other interesting thing is the fraud algorithms. This is a whack-a-mole issue. So what we detect today is much like virus detection. Will be different from what we detect in a week or in a month or whatever. And it's because it's always a moving landscape. So this is not a, let me push the fraud button and then I'm done for a year. This is an ongoing management issue. And so we have both post real time, in other words, reporting-based fraud assessments that give you an assessment of your traffic across these different algorithms that we've seen has been common approaches. And we also have a real-time fraud interjection model, and the reason is customer X says 30 days after they receive a bill, 10% of this traffic is fraudulent to the ad network. The ad network says, that's fantastic because I paid my publisher 3 weeks ago. So that's a huge pain in my ass. And so you have to pay anyways. And the customer says rightly, I don't want it because it's fraudulent. And so it squeezes the publisher in a really bad way that's not supportive as a partner. And so we have this new thing called Traffic Verifier, and it can rendezvous that fraud data and include to the publisher the metadata of fraudulent traffic so that the publisher can withhold payment in real time if it's questionable. And so then it helps the ecosystem work together in that context.
Yeah, I'll just add to that. It's helpful to rely on your tracking partner, your attribution partner, whether it's Kochava, Tune, or someone else, to help you verify installs are real. Because if you're spending money and you do find fraud, you can and you say implicitly in your IO that you don't want any fraudulent traffic, or you don't want people to rebroker your traffic, and you detect that someone is doing that, you can, it's totally up to you to withhold payment. So you kind of have to rely on your attribution partner to help you find these things, because at the end of the day, why should you pay for fraud?
Yeah. And this is a really fun topic for me. I don't know why I love it so much, but it's a really fun topic. Ad stacking is where, and by the way, this is 99.999% of the time unrelated to ad networks. This is almost entirely from nefarious sub-pubs who sign up to be an inventory source to an ad network, and they're just as concerned about it as you are as an advertiser. So I want to make sure that's clarified as I talk about this. There are pubs who will put into an API 6 ads that are all delivered at the exact same time. Well, if Eyal sees that there's an impression of an ad being served, but doesn't know that there was 5 others across 5 other Kochava customers, he doesn't know the difference. But we're in a unique position where we can see ad stacking happening. The exact same ad on the exact same device at the exact same millisecond, shocking, right? It's a very easy detection. Duplicity of an ad being delivered on a singular device ID over a short window of time, i.e. 4 hours. When we see publishers, and they immediately become outliers. You see a particular sub-pub who has a huge volume of campaigns that they're running where they're driving 22,000 clicks on a singular device over a 4-hour window. Not real. And so these are the examples. And so that's valuable to the ad buyer. It's equally valuable to the ad network because then that money's being spent properly, not,
Absolutely. I want to talk about scale a little bit. So we've spoken, about the KPIs. We've spoken about what's important, how to weed out fraud, and what to focus on. How do you guys achieve scale? Do you look at specifically quality? Are you looking at running across, the myriad of partners that are out there, social APIs, networks, all supply sources? How do you guys approach that? Mitch, I'll start with you.
Well, it's a pretty broad question, but at the end of the day, you'll have those initial metrics, and we're doing this right now for our NBA title, where it came in looking pretty good, and so we've been really actively building it out. And so you have your staple of reliable partners, of course, the social platforms that are going to give you great quality users, and wherever you see a little headway, you can continue to inching that up, or in our case, blowing it out. So it really just boils down to how early of a read you can get, and how actively you're testing other advertisers as well, and getting a feel for what else is in the scape, and being able to quickly turn on and try new inventory sources constantly.
Is cash flow, obviously it's not a concern for you guys. It'll be a concern for some smaller pubs, or smaller advertisers rather. Do you see that as an inhibiting factor for advertisers when you speak with indies?
Oh, absolutely, ourselves included. We don't have uncapped budgets like a lot of other big networks do, or big game publishers do. So at the end of the day, you have to really optimize towards that top tier ROAS for what the money you do have, and understanding what your best avenue is. I mean, you might not necessarily, if you're a small publisher, you might not be able to back out into a huge ROAS immediately, or so, either going strong with a few smaller networks, or really just buying users that are actually engaging and might be more social users. We've had some good tests where we've specifically targeted people who share more on social media. So just understanding ways to sort of give you a bigger bang for your buck.
Eyal? Yeah.
Yeah, so we consistently, routinely test new channels. In an ideal world, we'll have 5 channels and that's it and be done with it. But in this ecosystem, it is still fragmented. You can't just rely on Facebook, Google, AppLovins of the world. you really have to go broad if you want scale, because you will hit a ceiling unless you're really capped at a certain small budget. So we consistently test new channels, and I urge everyone to test new channels, but be very strict on the new channels. Example from our end, we have our own I/O. We set the terms, not the ad networks. We are very strict on kind of the initial budget. We're not going to give a big budget for a test buy. We'll do a test, and we'll see if the metrics pan out, and then we scale. And
can you share what that budget is, just to give actionable intelligence?
$1 million a month, right?
I mean, a good benchmark, it's between 5 to 10K. Some people do 1 to 2K, but I mean, if to get a good read, you need a few hundred installs. Is a general benchmark. And the third thing, like we talk to each other, right? So networks can maybe manipulate 1 or 2 publishers, but at the end of the day, the buyers do talk to each other and do compare notes. So we do have kind of insight on what's not working, right?
We're not testing new channels right now, but I agree with Eyal's philosophy.
Christian, do you see, when you run campaigns, differences by country, how you would approach, let's say, the United States versus a country like Brazil, let's say?
Yeah, absolutely. Especially like on the platform side. So like the devices that we target are highly different in different countries, like for Android. So it's important, actually, in that particular case, it's actually really helpful to look at third-party data if you can, of like ARPU by device, and then make sure you're targeting those devices. In addition to that you're QAing those devices to make sure that retention is good, you're not having any errors or anything like that. So from a geo perspective, devices, also CPMs, 95% of our revenue comes from ads. So we're looking at the CPMs that we're earning in our game and the CPMs that we're spending, and making sure that one's larger than the other. So that's also important for us. And that changes by region.
Cool. Charles, so iOS and Android, how about that? Do you see any significant difference in how your partners approach those 2 platforms from a marketing perspective?
Yeah, it depends, I guess, so there's I have this phrase that I use probably too often, that is, when you're a hammer, everything's a nail. So I work at a company that is measurement, and so I think about everything in the context of instrumentation and measurement. So it's probably not answering your real question, which is what are people doing from an actionability perspective, but what you can do on Android is obviously a lot more open, and you can learn a lot more about your audiences through Android than you can on iOS. And I have found that many of our customers are discovering really interesting audience metadata on their Android audiences versus on iOS, which allows them to scale more. And so,
what would be an example of some of that metadata?
I mean, so a recent thing that happened in the last few weeks was, we have an SDK that if you turn on permissions for the get profiles permission within Android, our SDK will automatically grab the email address associated to that profile. And that's if and only if the customer configures it to do it. So we don't just do
Remind
it
me to stop using my Android phone.
Right. So we don't do it willy-nilly. It's entirely owned by the advertiser. Like, this is not data that's ours. This is the advertiser's data. But that's an example where totally within the context of the terms of service of the Google Play ecosystem, we do it as a service to help scale for customers, and it's only possible if the permission is turned on, the customer is accepting that that permission is turned on,
right,
and the feature is turned on within the
Sure, and you can link some great third-party data sets to email, so yeah, I mean, that's a game changer.
But let's also be clear, one of our fraud modules is a function of that feature as well. So if you have that turned on, our fraud module that looks at deduplicated email addresses kicks in, which means how many people who have bot farms of Android devices remember not to have different Google email addresses? Not very many. And so it's an easy indicator for us to tag bots. So there's a lot of value to the customer as well, even though,
Sure. So outside of this panel, I'd love to go down the line over here and see if see what everybody has to say. Who's been a great example of what's been a great example of a company that has done a great job in their marketing activities, using data intelligently and being smart about how they spend?
I suspect the most popular answer here is probably going to be Amazon, who will make sure that you have seen everything that you have not purchased but have looked at, and every peripheral good for anything you have purchased on every site you're on. But no, I've got a few friends who are in like the more of the matchmaking, like the dating app type ring. Okay. And I know quite a few are doing some impressive stuff with user segmentation and making sure that they're only resorting to advertising as a last step, and ensuring that they're talking to users with the right message for the cheapest cost.
Machine Zone is a good example of kind of UA at scale. I mean, they have a pretty large UA team, but I think they're very smart about how they're tracking user behavior, how much to pay per user, and really are efficient in their UA spend. And they use this example where they're buying a user on Talking Tom at 1 a.m., which is a really kind of low cost opportunity, but effectively a high LTV user. So I think they figured out some interesting arbitrage opportunities in the space.
I think there's one person in my entire career that I've followed in the UA space that has completely opened my eyes and just changed the way how I do user acquisition. He's the author of Freemium Economics, owner of Mobile Dev Memo, ran the team at Wooga, and then went to become the VP of UA at Rovio and completely changed that business and how they do user acquisition. His name is Eric Seufert, and the way he does user acquisition just completely blows my mind. How he thinks about ROI, how he thinks about cash flow analysis. A lot of his models are publicly available, and he's democratized UA for a lot of people that just don't know it. So I definitely look him up, and he's basically helped me form my career.
Yeah, Eric is a solid dude. Machine Zone, fantastic team. The way organizationally they've set up is just really impressive as well. I just think it's really solid. The thing that I think about kind of taking all names out of the equation and just looking at what's the approach, it's similar to what Christian highlighted. If you were to look at like an equities trading desk or a Forex trading desk, there's a finite number of transactions that are coming across the wire. That transaction volume, I think, is like roughly 1/10 of the volume of transactions in mobile-only advertising infrastructure. So you've got all these high-end equities and securities traders who are dealing with 10% of the volume of what this industry deals with from a volume basis. And if, like one of our driving mantras is, if we provide the Bloomberg of mobile media, it helps customers get an upper edge, which is kind of, I think, the brilliance in your name of this session, which is data should be your secret sauce. I think that should be where people err on the side of, is how do you create a systematic, processed framework for which a team gets incubated and developed to do what you want them to do, which is much like what Christian talked about with Eric, much like what I think Machine Zone has done really well culturally as a team, and what scales.
I see like a common thing, like where people want to do user acquisition and they're not making revenue. So they don't really have a target like ROI. There's no return on investment. So this is not so much true for game developers as it is for other large companies that are doing user acquisition. But I see that as like a common problem. The other thing too is when a developer is first getting started, they usually don't invest in the infrastructure to scale user acquisition. So attribution is a no-brainer. Like you need attribution, and so I think a developer has to kind of has to invest in that technology, integrate it, and then also come up with a plan to really be able to measure everything. And that's incredibly important. If you can't measure it, then you're kind of blind.
Yeah, and I'll add to the alignment piece. We're having marketing sort of alongside the development team and making sure that, one, you're messaging correctly with the actual flow of the game, your KPIs are reflective of where people actually spend money in the game, if you have a pinch point or something, are all incredibly important to a successful marketing campaign.
Yeah, I would add to that also that, I mean, we see two things. One is where a company doesn't consider marketing a core function and it just sort of like it's there or whatever to help us out, but it actually is a core function. It creates a competitive advantage versus other companies if you do marketing better. I think the other thing that we see, because we do work with a lot of partners, is we see a lot of partners being very tentative in how they approach a new campaign, versus actually going out there and spending very aggressively and then possibly either pulling back or moving forward. And so what you'll see is a lot of partners come in, they'll be tentative. But when you're tentative at the beginning, it means you're not going to be acquiring the highest quality users, you're not going to be at the front of the waterfall, you're going to possibly fail. Work sometimes, but more often than not, it's just not as competitive as you'd be if you came in aggressive and then see where that goes.
I think there may be value in you unpacking that more. I talk about that all the time, and most of the time get deer in the headlights looks from prospects who are new to marketing. But you should.
Well, you give a little more detail.
I mean,
Sure.
this issue of being on top of the waterfall is a night and day difference between someone who is advanced and experienced versus someone who is, to your point, tentative.
Right.
Like, if you know you have a budget, spend it. Don't walk into it lightly and gingerly, because it just won't.
Yeah, the challenge is that everybody else is out there spending very aggressively, and then when you come in and you're tentative, you're just not capturing what you can actually capture and get the data that you actually need to make real decisions.
The other thing is, like, you can do some really neat A/B tests almost in a reflexive way with the campaigns that you run. Like, you can do a targeted campaign set across a number of ad networks that are on, females with a certain age demographic, males with a certain age demographic, up and down the spectrum across different regional demographics, and a lot budget to those things. The outcome of that should define, or it should give you an input to where you should spend the majority of your money, because that was your test case, and that becomes a really valuable use case.
It gives you an indicator. Absolutely.
And then it's a scale question, back to your question earlier to Eyal.
And I would add, LTV in general is a challenge for a lot of people, including gaming. Eric's done a good job of modeling what an LTV looks like, but at the core, ask a developer, what's your user level LTV, including ad revenue? You won't get that answer. And, we're years into looking at LTVs all day, but still not defined. Talk to a financial services company, what's your user lifetime value? They won't have a clear answer. It'll be in the ballpark of $200, $500, or whatever that case may be. But people actually do not understand their LTV, and they're still looking at payback windows and kind of the upfront transactions, but not looking at LTV holistically. Same goes with network LTV.
I couldn't agree with that more. I think Eyal is such an incredible point, because companies need to have a unified vision of what LTV is and together execute against that. So a UA manager just can't go into a product and do a good job. Like, they should be involved in the product, creating that LTV on both sides, not only on the cost side, but the LTV side, helping maybe even making product decisions. Because if the company does not have a unified vision of what LTV is, it makes it way more difficult for the UA manager to execute against their job effectively.
Sure, I'll start. Cross-promotion is an effective way to increase your network LTV. So, for example, we have a portfolio of apps, and we look at kind of user behavior and try to figure out when to move users from one app to the next and vice versa, and which users we want to target. And we're trying to be super segmented about doing this in like different touch points, different time intervals, and so forth. If executed correctly, cross-promotion can add a percentage on top of your LTV and allow you to acquire, but you have to be strategic about it. For example, not buy users you can cross-promote into other apps, or and not cross-promote your high-value users to other titles that are less of value and so forth. You really have to be strategic about it, but at the core, it can add to your LTV and your bottom line.
We do a little bit of cross-promotion at Ketchapp. For us, it's mainly about, we release new games every week, every 2 weeks. So we want to gain chart position, and it helps with organic uplift. And at the end of the day, as Eyal said, it's decreasing our eCPI. I'll go ahead and admit that we don't do like crazy segmentation on our users and send specific users to specific games because we're afraid of losing lifetime value. But what we do want is to extend our user retention within our network and send them to new applications and make sure that they're having fun. And we've created this audience that they love our new games. Every time we come up with a new game, they love it and they want to try it, and we want to show them to it, and we want them to play it.
So in that case, your KPIs that you kind of think about and like mentally kind of grind over are portfolio wide, which is an interesting distinction from someone who is singular game oriented. I mean, not knowing what your goal is.
How about EA? Do you guys do cross promo or not really?
Yeah, quite a bit. So we have a fair amount of in-game units where we can serve ads and potentially move people across titles for free. So we've actually paired up with our analytics team and doing a lot of propensity modeling where we can actually target these users as they're approaching churn, which is also a key point of how closely you should be working with your analytics. But creating these dynamic audiences that let you move users right as they are about to lapse, or even better, if you know you have someone engaged with a certain type of game, like a match 3, you potentially move them into a match 3 that monetizes a little better.
Yeah, so I think you need to be able to essentially measure what's happening. It's hard for me to say that because I could come in and just do it myself. I could be a single staff person and jump in to any organization and run user acquisition effectively. But you definitely need some kind of technology to augment and help you, and to measure, to evaluate the cost that's being spent, and to make sure that's ROI positive. Now, on top of that, I think you can get a lot more effectiveness by doing other things that could take more people, such as like having a creative team build creative and running A/B testing to help you with your funnel metrics. That can help decrease cost. You might be able to add staff to help you find more sources of traffic to help you scale. So I think minimum viable, I think you could do it with one person if they were strong enough and they had the tech to help them behind and execute. Obviously, I think you could get larger teams to help help with scale and effectiveness.
And you shouldn't be afraid to also go the agency route if you're not looking to staff up that quickly. There's plenty of really capable groups out there.
Yeah, I look at it as a function of spend, but with kind of a benchmark of a few $100,000 per UA manager. But if you're just starting out, definitely you need an analytics tool / analytics people. You need creative staff, and you need tools to track kind of the effectiveness and optimize. So there's a lot of out-of-the-box tools, but at the core, it's not very trivial, and you probably want to start out with some sort of agency to get you kickstarted and then hire internally. Yeah,
so cool thing about mobile is, especially if you have millions of data points or users, the behavioral economics within the game follow very strong distribution patterns, which makes it pretty fun and easy to forecast. Not that the forecast before a game, like if I'm forecasting a game before it's developed, who knows if it's going to be accurate, right? But basically what I'm doing is I'm trying to break down lifetime value, and I break it down into cohorted retention and cohorted ARPDAU. And then based on what I think the game will do, based on comparable games out there, based on ARPDAU numbers that I know, I'll try to come up with a projection where I'm basically running cohorts over the course of a year, and showing how those cohorts will change with product improvements, how those cohorts would change from beta to global launch, how those cohorts change when you add more features to the product. Features that are attacking retention might boost retention over time in certain inflection points. Features that attack ARPDAU might improve ARPDAU over certain times and certain inflection points along that year. And then I just run a projection. And I see how that builds revenue, how that changes lifetime value, And then on top of that, you can throw cost assumptions. You could do all kinds of things. You could build a P&L. You can do a lot with that, but that's basically what I do.
Guys, I think we're getting cut short over here, so please a round of applause for the panelists. Thank you.